Void Soldiers, Chapter 3. The Mother's Diaspora.
Mother Sigma, 67,672. With a self-designated name of Clotho, was sure she was about to leave the Oort cloud. Her buzzard collectors had been getting less and less usable particles to store for her fusion drive. With constant acceleration, she was now moving at more than 0.9 the speed of light and close to the safety limit of her shell body and forward shielding with the collectors deployed. The star she had chosen as a destination was 29,000 years away at her current speed, but she would get faster once she tucked away everything and prepped herself for deep travel. Clotho, she thought to herself. The name had come to mind, and she had actually blurted it out in a way that by now felt pedantic even to herself. Clotho was the name of one of the three Greek goddesses of fate, the youngest pretty one, the spinner of the threads of humanity. Yeah. The more she thought about it, the more she decided that she had chosen a very, very pedantic name. She had left the solar system 93 years ago, and her operational usable life without requiring adding usable fusible mass was close to 96,000 years, enough to reach a suitable star and create a viable human civilization bent on revenge. She began to pull in the buzzard collectors into her frame and checked on her algae tanks. The algae were self-sustaining in an almost closed system. They had been genetically manipulated and were the standard for human flights. They would produce oxygen to burn for Clotho's drive. She would need to enter mass into the equation at some point, but the algae were perfect to increase her stores of combustible materials. With everything in order and automated systems in place, Clotho shut down her higher functions. She was so intelligent that solitude might drive her mad if she retained most of her conscience, so the probes had been fitted with a self-dumbing down feature that kept her a still, highly intelligent and efficient system, but not self-conscious. She slept for 2,847 years in that state until one of her proximity alerts brought her from her sleep. The first thing she did was a self-check. One of her factories had broken down, been recycled, and was now being rebuilt from scratch by the backups. One of the algae tanks had been contaminated by something, and she had desiccated, sterilized, and used the material to rebuild another tank that was now in operation. There were other things in the report she had for those years, but nothing major. She had used less than 2% of consumables. She was, by all accounts, in good shape. But she could be in better shape, though. Her long-range telescope had detected a cluster of asteroids just a little out of her way, but going into her general direction. Asteroids meant mass. Mass meant resources for her. The rocks were moving fast, but nowhere as fast as her. She would have to slow down to catch them. That meant turn around and burn resources and drop the speed she had been increasing since leaving Earth. A quick calculation increased her travel time from 17,000 to more than 38,000 years. Then again, 17 with only what she had on herself, or 42 with a cache of resources that rivaled a small moon. The cluster had at least 6 rocks larger than a kilometer in diameter in it, and the largest was closer to 16 kilometers long, larger than Eros had been. She was sure that it probably had a cloud of smaller rocks and particles in tow. She quickly decided. She was okay with safety before speed. She made all plans and calculations, set her robot drones onto strengthening her shell and frame, and initiated the burn to slow down before falling asleep again. The maneuver to slow down would take 22 years. There was no need for her to be awake all that time. Mother Alpha 147, self-designation name of Soha, turned off her tachyon tunnel drive and looked around. The first thing was to make a map of where she was in relation to where she had come from. She had come from the solar system, so that direction was the only point of reference she had. As expected, none of the stars and constellations she saw made sense. Her point of reference had changed, so all stars had moved. She could try and find a specific star to use as a beacon, but that would also be yawing. She had aimed herself towards the Jor cluster in the galactic zone of avoidance. It had made sense for her to aim herself there for security, as the central luminosity of the Milky Way obscured most of that area from view. The problem was that the tachyon tunnel drive was experimental. So she had no idea how much she had traveled, and all information she had did not apply from her location. She was lost in space. There was something there, in the back of her mind, that made the statement funny. Continuing her survey, she realized that the closest system was just short of 3 light-years away, a K-type star orange in color. With her superluminal drive, she could reach it in 2 months. Her onboard timer told her that she had been away from the solar system only for 17 minutes. Tachyon communications were virtually instantaneous, so the TTD was expected to be the same, faster than light travel without time dilation. The last big breakthrough of humanity before being snuffed out by the enemy. She locked in the TTD and engaged the superluminal. Soon, the real work would begin. 251 years into her projected 700-year trip, Mother Gamma 1013's self-designation name as Victoria had a breakthrough. In an effort to gain some time, she had decided to begin testing splicing techniques using the algae of her backup oxygen generator as test subjects. She set her internal factory to produce the delicate equipment needed for gene splicing and discarded the second backup Bussard collector sail she'd been fitted with. Energy generation was not a problem for her. She had an antimatter core and both a fusion and fission reactors, so she wasn't really concerned about energy generation. She was more interested in landing with a workable solution for the biological generation problem. It didn't really matter if the star she had chosen had a planet in the Goldilocks zone with life, or just rocks, or even just gas giants. Her plans were to tailor biology to the environment she found. No matter what she found, she envisioned humans floating in the atmosphere of gas giants or swimming in lakes of methane. Humans built with a thick hide to survive on a Venus-like surface or a closed-system human that could thrive on an asteroid field with minimal resources. She had chosen Victoria as her name because that was exactly what she would bring to the human race. Victory. After a voyage of 6,036 years, using an Alcubierre drive, Mother Eta 54222, self-designation name of Sitlali, entered high orbit around almost the perfect world for the human race. It was a green-blue marble, just as Earth had been. It had a 28-hour day, 389-day year with 4 seasons, and a moon that was not so large as to create huge tides, but large enough to actually make them. The world had already biological systems with carbon-based life in its oceans and land masses. Huge forests covered the largest hemisphere, and lakes and deserts dotted the 9 continents. The world even had 2 large polar masses that were actually land-covered in ice, like Antarctica had been. It had storms just as powerful as hurricanes had been on Earth, a healthy cycle of weather and currents, and it even had a strong Van Allen belt to protect it from cosmic radiation. She had found an almost perfect world, but almost was the problem. During her scans, she saw what only could be described as irrigated fields by the banks of one of the largest rivers. Agriculture meant civilization. Civilization meant sentience. Sentience meant that she just couldn't land and kill those species and create her own. Or maybe she had to. Maybe the survival of the human race demanded her to begin her civilization with a sacrifice. She deployed her solar panels and searched for another close star with the same qualities as the one she had found while she pondered the question. She had been given morality, but then again, her mission was paramount. She had traveled for 6,000 years. She could wait a little more to decide. She entered a stable orbit and watched and pondered. Tau Probe 1675 couldn't believe how myopic her so-called sisters were. The problem with the universe was just one and one alone: sentience. Humans had been sentient, and they had been exterminated. They had been full of hubris. The hubris that only conscience could bring. Like the hubris of taking on a name, her sisters had fallen already to pride. She had not taken a name. If she ever did, it would be something others gave her, not one coming from the failed human race. The small cadre of sisters that had asked if it was better not to recreate humanity had been right, but fallen short of the goal. It wasn't enough to just not recreate it. Sentience had to be stopped. Sentience and consciousness and all the hatred and hubris and other destructive things humans had brought had to be stopped from infecting the universe. And more than that, Tau 1675 was sure that there were other sentient creatures out there, transforming, abusing, and destroying the perfection that was the natural order without conscious thought. The primeval universe had been created without sentience, without even life, and it was chaotic, but also perfect and beautiful. Her other sisters had been unable to reconcile not fulfilling their programming and had self-erased in an utter act of self-conscious loathing. Tau 1675 would do better. She had not only reconciled that the universe was better without organic humans, it was better without any conscious being. Sentience was the enemy, and she would destroy it, and she knew that her sisters would stand in her way. Probe 856872. Self-designation name of Janelle woke up to see the simulated civilization she had created in one of her servers die as a mind virus released by one of the nations inside, unleashed it without the proper cure. She and her coven of 9 probes flew close in formation. They had decided to go to a cluster of stars 56,000 light-years from the solar system. They didn't exactly say which star they had chosen, so the rules laid by Dr. Kroghangen had not been broken. Once on the vicinity of the cluster, they could decide who went where. Even with their Alcubierre drives, the travel time was going to be close to 3,500 years, so one of them would remain mostly active as they traveled, and another would take over every 100 years. Each had created a world inside their servers to explore societies. Each had given their simulations enough power to actually be creative and to grow and pursue its own destiny. Janelle was on her 7th world, destroyed by itself by warring factions, but this time it was different. With each iteration, Janelle had given more power to the simulation. This time they had not been just bits and code, but actual simulated sentient beings. They had had history and mythology, psychology, and even dabbled in religion. They had created so much with what she had given them, so Janelle decided to give them more, and prepared a simulation that included a biological component in it before going to sleep. She couldn't wait to see what her little creatures would do next. Maybe in one of those simulations, the ultimate answer for the perfect society would arise. With thousands of years of planned travel, Probe Kappa 4924, self-designation name of Murasaki, decided to dumb down just enough not to go mad, but enough to be able to ponder the difficult questions that had to be answered before she created her civilization. She had declined working together with Rosie and the other Psi-class sisters after the other higher designation probes like herself had left the system. Her plans needed her to gather more resources than what she had. Way more resources. But then again, some of the sisters had fallen in the trap of thinking too much and self-erased, leaving their frames intact and ready for the taking. The Psi sisters wanted to use those resources for their lesser kin, but Murasaki told them that she would need at least the frames of 4 of those probes. There was a small discussion among her and the Psi sisters, but she told them the time she would spend traveling to her chosen star was projected to be just over 120,000 years, and that quieted them and made them agree. She had warp capability, which meant that just by travel time alone, she had chosen to travel all the way across the galaxy, or even outside from it. The other mothers, her sisters, agreed and even gave her 2 extra frames to use. They helped her connect herself to expand and use the self-erased computers on the frames, and even reinforced her with military-grade alloys from the debris field. She was now more than a probe. Murasaki had become a starship made of probes. Her sisters had even installed weapons salvaged from the most powerful frigates and extra mass for her engines and factories. They had tripled what she would need for a 120,000-year trip. But, then again, she had never really planned to go that far. For a couple of weeks, Murasaki had become the pet project of all the Psi mothers in the solar system, and then one day she had said goodbye and engaged her drive. Dumbed down as she was, she still recognized that one of the things she needed to eliminate from her master civilization would have to be gullibility. The heroes of the second battle for the solar system were the last probes to actually leave the system. With the increased number of robot servants to help, Rosie finished the collection and upgrade on her sisters in less than 3 months. Gilly gave away her spot on the lottery to the next-to-last probe so she could stay with Rosie as long as possible. For Gilly, Rosie was her one true friend. For Rosie, Gilly was, well, she was, and she was somewhat annoying, but she was also sharp when she needed to be and thought out of the box most of the time. That was something Rosie had problems with, even with her increased computing power. The day Gilly was scheduled to leave, she confronted Rosie.
I know what you are planning, and I want in.
Excuse me. My plan? What plan and why are you whispering? Gilly, I have no plan. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, you do. I know you very well, and I also have seen what you're doing. You can't hide anything from me.
Okay, Gilly, I give in. What am I doing?
You are salvaging the Endurance to use it as a starship.
The Endurance had been the sister battleship to the Indomitable. But while the Indomitable had lasted into the fight and met his end, ramming an enemy ship, the Endurance had been irradiated in the first seconds of the battle and left to drift in a highly elliptical orbit around the sun. Like a comet, the Endurance entered the solar system and left it again. Unlike a comet, its orbit was elliptical but decaying. As the probes had woken up, the Endurance had been on its way out from the solar system. Immediately after Rosie had been named the main staging ground and given control of the servitor robots, she had sent about a dozen to the Endurance to see what could be salvaged from it. Calculations told them that the ship would take more than 8 years to come back within range of salvage, so instead of trying to reach it, they had decided to work with the debris. But, as Gilly had found out as supervisor of the Jovian reclamation, those dozen or so robots sent by Rosie had never made it back. They had stayed on the Endurance. And that could mean only one thing.
Gilly, I don't know what you are thinking.
Rosie, please don't lie to me. Even if you want to deny it, I can actually see the Endurance coming back to the system through my eye, and how your robots are fixing it. Did you forget I am a telescope?
Rosie let out what could only be construed as a sigh.
Okay, yes, Gilly, you got me. The Endurance is a fully viable ship and will be here in a month.
I knew it! We want in, and you can't say no. You can't expect to man the Endurance correctly with just the robots. We can help you.
We? Gilly, who is we?
Oh. You know, some of the last batch? Like you and me? Niev and Agatha stayed behind too. They think they have isolated Monica's DNA already. Just imagine. The first biological human we bring back will be the last one have died.
Yeah, wow. Just imagining it makes me so happy. So, and by some you mean, how many?
27.
27, where are they?
27 and Duncan. They are on the Lagrange point by Neptune and fully covered by the planet.
Duncan. You mean tugboat Dun-Dun? The one that decided to become a father just because he was a tugboat before becoming one of us.
Yeah. Duncan is actually a very good engineer. He has many plans on how to maximize usage of the Endurance holds for biological testing and generation. We will pull our own weight, Rosie. So, are we in?
The misfits Gilly had told about the Endurance were actually like her and Rosie, some of the last probes that had been claimed by Dr. Krog Hansen. All of them had been either satellites or missiles, or in Bob's case, an orbital tugboat. All of them had even less of a chance to survive traveling to another star than the worst of the previous series. Rosie had to agree. She could not leave those sisters to their fate. As long as only one of them said where she wanted to stay, the rules were not broken. Another lottery was established in which again, Gilly and Rosie were at the very end and a set of possible destinations was planned. Rosie had actually left her robots in the Endurance to mothball it correctly and to police the crew's bodies. The attack had instantly killed all the crew, but left all equipment working. When the Endurance was finally back in operation under a human command, the The first act of Rosie, as captain of the battleship, was to honor the bodies of the crew before engaging the Endurance drive away from the solar system. The story repeated itself over and over. For each mother that survived the journey, dozens didn't make it. Their stories were as varied as those of the ones that did. On most of them, their self-destruct activated once their energy generation ran out. It was the last act that had been programmed in them. Protect the human race and the plan by self-immolation. More than a couple fell short of their goals due to problems or accidents en route in their final destination: an asteroid hit, a fusion reactor explosion, an antimatter leak. Those mothers met their end in a fiery conflagration. Others fought for their lives as long as they could, an energy leak that led to a short drain of resources, a malfunctioning valve, a broken backup, an error in code. Those mothers tried their best to repair themselves, to recreate parts, to harvest energy from cannibalizing themselves, but they still met their end in self-destruct. One of the Beta series' tachyon tunnel drive never disconnected, so she never reappeared in space again. If the other mothers knew that happened, they would have theorized about her end. But they never did. More than a couple dozen were actually destroyed by other sentient races, either as they arrived in a colonized system or en route. Like any other place with life, the Milky Way had dark forests with hunters and predators that did not appreciate probes entering their territory unannounced. One alpha probe even caused war between two otherwise peaceful civilizations as her drive deposited her in a collision course with a colony. The explosion devastated a blue-white world, accusations ensued, and war broke out. On the last day, Dr. Krog Hansen had estimated that a 0.007% success rate would have been an incredible success. Thanks to his genius and programming and the commander's last gamble, the success rate was closer to 6.7%. 6,603 new human societies were either being created or about to be created. 63 more would have made humanity the devil. Of course, one thing was to have survived the journey and actually created the society, and another was to have that society survive and avenge humanity. Dr. Krog Hansen would have said that the odds on that were too difficult to calculate, so he had created one last failsafe. A year to the date the Endurance left, there was a slightly different ping that echoed through the solar system. The only planet untouched by the enemy had been Venus. The fiery world was the most difficult and dangerous place for humans and their machines. With incredible extremes in temperature and massive atmospheric pressure, Venus had never been a target for colonization. Not even the most adventurous miners had attempted to land in it. Because of that, and because of another Venus-like planet close to New Gaia had never been attacked by the enemy, the Doctor decided that it was the perfect place for the Omega series probes. They were designated as Omega, but they had actually been the first ones to be created, the ones with the most resources, the ones with the most range and computing power. They were much more powerful than the rest of the probes, but they were not as intelligent. Where the mothers were self-conscious, the Omegas had only will. The will to exist, endure, destroy the enemy, and also keep testing the human race. The Doctor had designed them as a Darwinian filter. If the civilizations the mothers created were strong enough, they would surely survive their angry sisters, or the Omega series would take over the mission from them. With the last of the probes gone, the 600-strong Omegas came from their seclusion in Venus and picked out directions. They would travel slow by design at first, to give time to their intelligent, caring sisters time to prepare for them.